been working to improve the user experience of running FreeDOS on my 286 homebrew system here. And one of the things I've been working on really is in the BIOS, just trying to clean up or add a little bit of extra functionality to make that FreeDOS environment feel better. And I'm going to start here by turning on my system. And my video capture device, by the time it recognizes there's a signal, it pretty much already is through the post. So I'm going to hit reset here just so you can see, from the time it's actually resetting what that post process looks like. It comes up and I show the BIOS version. I indicate I'm running at 11 megahertz for the processor. It detects the CF card, which is the SanDisk 4 gig that I'm running currently. And then it gets into basically the loading of FreeDOS. So when I get done with my post part of it, before it starts loading FreeDOS, I have a post beep, and you might hear that in the microphone on the video, or you might not. But if you do hear a beep, that's the point at which it's done with the BIOS post. FreeDOS starts by loading the master boot record, and then I load the boot sector. The boot sector then gets the FreeDOS kernel loaded, and then the FreeDOS kernel eventually loads up the command interpreter, which is FreeCom. Now, normally on this boot process where it says press F8 here, it would just delay for a few seconds, and I have some interrupt work to get done before that countdown is going to work quite right. I have something that's not quite finished there. So I'll come back to that. But manually, I'll just hit the space bar and have it continue. And so then at that point, it has loaded up FreeCom, and that is the command interpreter that I'm using at this point. And I can do things like do a directory, and it lists out the files that I have there in that root directory. And then it continues doing some disk I/O I can see, and I think it's just caching some stuff in memory at that point. But then I can do things like change into a directory. So if I want to go into FreeDOS, and you'll notice I have a backspace now that works. That didn't work in the last video. But then I can do a directory of what is there. I do not have vertical scrolling in place yet. If I go into the bin folder, and again, if I want to just say, let's look at all the executables in order of name, and a previous viewer commented that the /W is a nice way to show a lot more on the screen, and that is helpful. So there's all the executables that I could run as part of this. So things that I've changed to make that a bit smoother of an experience is I did have to come into my Nano down here, and that is interpreting all my PS2 keyboard signals and raising an interrupt to my priority interrupt controller on my 286. And when I was changing that signal line for the interrupt, I really was just blipping it real quickly. I wasn't holding it very long. I changed it so that there's a 25 millisecond delay. So I'll change that signal for raising the interrupt. I'll hold it for 25 seconds and then I'll come back and set it back. That made a huge difference in my keyboard as far as its handling. So that was a nice improvement. And then I did some other miscellaneous stuff in the BIOS just to help with the keyboard, and to be able to track the cursor location, and when I backspace or forward movement, that it clears the old cursor, draws the new cursor. And the cursor sounds so simple, but it ends up that there's a fair amount just of little details to track to make sure that that cursor really works as you want it to. And I still don't have it quite dialed in perfectly, but it's good enough for me at the moment. Maybe something else to take a look at is I've created a folder in here. And the folder that I've created, or directory that I've created, is this REHSD. So I'm going to go ahead and change into that. And I now have some programs in here. And this first one I could point to is testcpp.com. And it is similar to code I've shown in older videos where I went into C++, I put together a simple little test program, compiled it, and then burned it into the flash ROM, or wrote it to the flash ROM of my 286. And then at runtime, I loaded that and essentially ran it or jumped to it. And that was fine, and that worked well with COM files. I don't think I could do that with an exe the way I was doing it before. But now that I've got FreeDOS running, I should be able to run executables. So I've taken that COM file, the CPP source code, and compiled it as an exe. And so now I also have a CPP-E, so a test CPP-E, which is an executable that I can run. And this loads fine. So then it loads, I draw a border, I say welcome, I ask for some keyboard input, I repeat back what I captured for input, I have some animated content that then runs, and then I draw a bunch of rectangles of different colors. And basically that's all being done from the C++ program. And so it seems like this is working, and this platform is going to be quite nice for me to start building some useful stuff, hopefully, on my 286 system. So my intention is to focus my efforts moving forward on C++ coding to write whatever functionality I'm hoping to get out of this system and run that on top of FreeDOS. And both my C++ and FreeDOS will leverage the BIOS interrupts that are there. But then I'm also going to start working on C++ where I'm going to write directly to, for example, the video card memory and directly manipulate it versus going through interrupts. And maybe you could consider that a video driver at some point that I'll write that will give me better access to that from FreeDOS. If I flip over to Visual Studio for a minute, this is where I have this source code for this CPP, basically test CPP-E, or it's just a C++ executable test program is all it is. And maybe I'll just scroll down and, I have this main procedure. And for the most part, I'm just starting out with some includes up top. I've got some sprite data, and this is that little animated character that moves across the screen. So that character has 3 different positions that I repeat. And then I've got some miscellaneous routines that I've put in here, functions that I put in here, basically to start doing different things. But in the main, the first thing I do is I want to disable that keyboard cursor because I don't want to see it when I first come up. And now to do that, really all I'm doing is making an interrupt call. So I'm calling interrupt 10, passing it function 1, and if I set this CL to 0, in other words CX I've set to 0, which means CL will be 0, that tells my interrupt routine in my BIOS just to clear the screen, or not clear the screen, but disable that cursor. And that's what I do is I disable that cursor then. I then continue and I print something out to the screen. I say loading, and then after that I swap frames on my video card. So my video card sitting here has 2 video frames. I can have one that I can manipulate from the 286, and then the other frame is going out the VGA output. Essentially it's being read for the output. And I can swap those back and forth. So I could write to one, swap it, then you'll see it on the output. Then I could write to the other, make some changes, swap it, etc. But if I go look at like that swap, I'm just coming in here and I'm saying, okay, I want to go out and do an interrupt 10, and the function is a B0. So that's one that I made up. So in my VGA code, I just came in here and said interrupt 10. And then if I scroll way down somewhere in my list, I have a B0, and all that does then is calls an internal routine I have in my BIOS called VGA swap frame, which actually modifies the registers on the VGA card and swaps which frame is being output. After I swap frames, I clear the screen. Now the reason I do the swap frame is I am saying loading, I print that, and then I want it to show up on the output. And technically, the way I have my code right now, when I have an end of line like this, that actually tells my VGA code to output that character data. So I kind of buffer it until I hit an end of line. Then I actually write it out, and I think technically I don't even need the swap frame because I'm implicitly doing a swap frame when I hit this character. But I clear the screen, I set up some options. Here's an option that says when I write a character out, don't swap frames. In other words, don't write a character to both frames, write it to one frame only. And what I do is I draw some rectangles. That's the blue border that you see around the screen. And then I set the cursor position, I write some text, and it won't swap frames is the idea with this option, character by character, it won't swap frames. but when it hits this \n, it will swap frames. So I draw the border, I put some text, I swap the frame, and then on the frame that's no longer visible, that doesn't have those updates yet, I do the same drawing and put on the text. And then I ask for a color, I get the color using fgets, and then I echo it back out and say you chose whatever color. And then I say I'm going to do some animated content, and then I have a procedure called animated sprite or animate sprite. And that goes through here and draws a sprite. And as it draws a sprite, it erases the previous one. And if I look at the draw sprite, it's just going to go in and actually pixel by pixel draw the pixels of those sprites. And the pixel by pixel is using an interrupt. So this is the worst case scenario for video performance. So every pixel is going through an interrupt, basically, to my graphics, my BIOS of my system. Now in the future, I'm going to change that so I don't do the interrupts, and instead I'll write directly to the memory, and I won't have to mess with going through all these interrupts. So this is worst case scenario, I figure, as far as performance is concerned. But then after I draw the sprite, the animated sprite content, I move the location of the cursor where I want stuff to happen. I say done. Then I'm going to do some rectangles, and I have this animate rectangle. And there, I'm doing it a little bit differently. I'm going to call a procedure I wrote called draw rectangle filled. I give it a start, an end, X and Y, and a color. And this is just the code that cycles through building those 3 lines of rectangles that incrementally increase in brightness. I do the reds, I do the greens, I do the blues. And those, I could have put all 3 of these loops inside of another outer loop, but this is how I'm doing it right now. But what that does is calls this procedure draw rectangle filled, and I have another custom interrupt in my BIOS. It is interrupt 10 function B5, and that allows me to draw an entire rectangle. So I don't have to do it pixel by pixel. I just give it the coordinates and the color, and within my BIOS, it takes care of all of the pixel by pixel work. So this makes it easy. It's an easy call. Give it XY screen coordinates, give it a color, and out comes a box. So kind of handy. In the future, though, I probably will not call this interrupt, and instead I'll just directly manipulate the memory on the video card and then change registers on the video card to flip between one frame and the other frame accordingly. And then after I get through that, I basically say done, and I jump into just a loop. And that loop right now, if I go take a look at it, is doing nothing. At some point, I'll bring in support so that I can move my mouse and have a mouse cursor if I want to use the mouse. Other work like that has to happen yet. But this is just C++ code, and I'm no expert in C++, so this will be an opportunity for me to learn a lot more about C++. I can include some of these libraries of functionality that will be helpful. One of the things that I ran into when I was working on the COM version of it, so this is testcpp.cpp, this is the version I was using to build a COM file. In it, I wanted to get down here and do some graphics type of rendering, and there's some other, let's see, it would be Wattcom functionality that I wanted to leverage. And when I would go build it or compile it, I would get an error, well, not an error, but warnings about some of the memory was being relocated or moved when I would try to do certain things. And actually, I could probably show what that looks like. So here is the executable version. I have a build file, and that's this file here, and you can pretty much ignore everything except for these bottom couple of lines. I'm going to build the initial, this is my COM file, and here's this WCL I'm using basically to do the build, and that's where I'm telling it I want to build a COM file, and then when it's done building, copy it over to this DOS folder I have so that I can run it in an emulator if I want to test things or play with it. And then I have this other file, the executable version, that I also build. Slightly different arguments. I don't tell it that I want a COM file. That gives me an executable that then I can test. But maybe for now, I will just take out, I'll have it not build this. But what I'll try to do maybe is to build the same source file. This should try to tell it to build it as a COM, not as an exe. And if I come in and do this, this is where I get these warnings about segment relocation, and then I run into problems with that with a COM file. And let's see, the specific code in this case that I was running into, I was starting to work on, could I leverage some of the libraries that come with Watcom, for example, to do some, graphics type work. And so here's something that comes with, it would be this graph.h, I believe is where this is coming from. This is something that I can use from Watcom. And it basically set a color, and then I say, move to a certain position on the screen, and then draw a line from here to here, or draw a line from here to here, here to here, swap frames, do it again, etc. So that's what I was trying to do, but this code, it runs into issues that if I include this, then it causes these segment relocations, and then the COM file fails, and that's a problem. So, and again, I don't know enough about that. There's probably ways maybe to work around that, but that's what I was running into way back when also, that if I wanted to build something that I could just manually load into a 64K segment and jump to it, it had to be in a COM format, not an exe format. And some of this functionality requires that I get away from COM files. So no big deal. Then now where I'm at with FreeDOS is I say, okay, that's fine. Let me just get this and have it just simply, use this same source file, but this time get rid of the COM and treat it as an executable. And now if I go in and I build it, it builds fine. So there, it built without issue. Now, I would say that when I look at this code, though, that I'm trying to eventually be able to use, this doesn't work yet. And I believe it's actually going to go then try to load a video driver and work within that video driver to make this stuff work behind the scenes. And I don't have that type of functionality yet. So something I'll have to work at some point in the future. That's not a top priority for now, but I can now leverage some of these additional libraries and not have to worry about being confined to a COM file. So I get all this done, I build it, and then I basically pop out my CF card. I copy that exe over, and then that gives me something like what you're seeing back here. So again, if I reset, because I don't have a way out of that program right now, I've just jump it into a loop and stop. But if I come over here and I change into that folder, again, these are the files that are there. I've got the CPP COM version and the exe version. I have an old win.com, and that I had written and had loaded manually in my flash ROM many videos ago. And I can run it on here. It's not going to work because some things aren't quite set up right. I don't have my mouse working yet, but here you can see it starts to paint me my start bar and my start button, and then I can see the cursor got drawn and cleared, and that's where I need to disable that cursor as I'm doing some of that drawing, which I've not done. So I'm going to reset one more time. Okay, so there I've got a nice clean boot again. And again, I can come in here and I can do my directory. What I'm going to be doing, though, is spending time back in C++. I'm probably going to start building a C++ library that's a graphics library that can leverage a combination of interrupt calls and direct access to my video card to let me do things like draw. Right now, I can easily draw circles, rectangles, whether outlined or filled. I can draw horizontal, vertical lines, but I can't draw lines at any arbitrary angle. I can't draw other, arcs or other shapes, polygons that I want to be able to do. So I think I'm going to try implementing that in C++, kind of get a library that I can use for the graphics. And then I think I'm going to also do a library for my sound card, a C++ library, so that I can get to, that's this sound card sitting over here. And basically this sound card is accessible through dual port memory. And I can write in commands to that dual port memory, and then it has an onboard processor that takes those commands, processes them. So I can play music, I can play sounds, I can store content right on the card, either in flash or in an SD card, or SD card here. And it can run independently of the rest of the system, the 286, so that I can say start some background music, let it play here while I continue to do things like graphics rendering or keyboard, mouse, I/O, things like that. So that is the next two things I think I'm working on, is two different C++ reusable sets of code, one for video, one for audio. If I go back to the output on my VGA again, this is where I'm sitting at. I would say that last time in the last video, I did go in and use, it was debug that I was in. I can still come in here and use all of those tools from FreeDOS. So here I can see that, I could go ahead and do let's just do a dump. And I could say I want to dump out at this address here. And that's dumping out my memory, and I can continue to dump out memory as I go, and that works fine. I'm going to go ahead and quit out of that. I did try to get edit to load, and if I go ahead and run edit, it does start to load it, and then my computer's beeping at me and it's saying you're missing some interrupt. And so then I would use my debug output and see what interrupt I'm missing. So this is telling me I'm missing interrupt 10, function 11. And I don't know if I go back to I did implement some interrupts to try to get closer to this, but that got me to this. So in this case, it is interrupt 11 or interrupt 10, function 11, AL is a 10, and I support when AL is a 12, but I don't support when AL is a 10. So that means I need to come in here and look up interrupts, and let's see, I think I've got that in my shortcuts here. And again, the interrupt that we're looking at is interrupt 10, function 11. So interrupt 10, function 11, but then the part that I don't have supported is if AL, so it's interrupt 10, function 11, and then the AL needs to be a 10, and that is user specified character definition table. So it's making some call here, and in my code I support 12. Okay, so I'm in function 11, and then I look for AL of 12, and if it's not that, then I say it's unsupported. And in this case, this is expecting interrupt 10, function 11, AL of 10, and I don't have support for that. And so I need to come back then to this and look up what is 10, and then I need to do something with that. And I don't know, I have to research more about what should I be doing as part of that, or can I just kind of cheat and ignore it? Possibly that's something I can do. But those types of things I need to keep working on. So no edit for me at this point because I am missing supported interrupts to be able to do that. And so I'm going to reset. But that's where I'm at. I'll have to keep playing with different things in here, see what works, what doesn't work. I think this will be a good platform for me to keep building on, taking advantage of the underlying operating system functionality of FreeDOS, continue to build up my BIOS functionality underneath that, start to build some reusable C++ functionality, and then see if I can get some useful functionality out of this 286 at some point, whether that's maybe a game or something else. I did start up a page on my blog about maybe brainstorming. So if I go into my blog here, I do have maybe this roadmap that I'm working on. So I have a previous roadmap that I had posted a while back, and it seems like as I look through that, I've made pretty good progress on that. So I've got an ISA card for ISA video card built. I've supported a lot of the critical interrupts for FreeDOS, so I can at least get to the point where I'm at right now. I've added mouse support. I've added an ISA sound card, an ISA IDE interface card. I have FreeDOS running from the CF card. I have hardware support for DMA, but I've not yet coded to it or tested it yet. And at some point, I built the option to update my flash ROMs from the PC, basically not have to actually pull out and program those chips independently. But then I thought maybe there's next steps that I could take a look at, and here's some of the things that come to mind. So I still have more BIOS interrupts. I have not yet supported disk writing, so I can't write to the CF card. I don't think it's going to be much effort to do that, but I've not implemented it. I do need to order an update of this PCB, which I'm going to wait until I get IDE writes working before I do that. I have lots of bug fixing to do. I'd love to get a basic game running, Snake, Tetris, something. I have now tried out a custom C++ DOS app, and that is working. I need to get my sound card working in FreeDOS, and I'd like to get some type of network access. I don't know what that's going to look like, but it's going to likely offload it to something like an Arduino. I might put together a RAM card, and I have to figure out how that might work, but could I add a 4 meg extended memory card in one of the ISA slots and give me something above the 1 meg mark? So I need to research if that's feasible and what that would look like. I probably do want to spin an updated video card at some point. And some of the things that are coming to mind as I get into that is, this hardware scrolling support. Could I design something that would support that? I don't know. I'd have to do a lot more research to understand what that could look like. The basics I get, but then when I look at, there's an interrupt, a BIOS interrupt that I should support that lets me specify the window that gets scrolled. And it's not the whole screen. And can I do that on hardware? I don't know. That's a challenge. I'll have to see if I can make some possibility out of it. And then I think I want to be able to access all of the video card memory through mapped memory, maybe above the 1 meg mark. So maybe I'll still have the 64K window at the A000 location, A0000, so 4 zeros there, A1000. Maybe I still have that window there, but then could I also access all the memory in its entirety? There's 2 meg of video memory. Could I access that somewhere above the 1 meg mark? If that's a possibility, that might let me work with that memory after it's booted and running in a more efficient way. And I'm kind of contemplating trying to maybe get a 386DX build going. Take what I've been building here in the 286 and just kind of upgrade it to a 386DX as far as the design of it. And again, I don't know if that's going to be an easy thing or not an easy thing, but somewhere on my list I'll get to that and see if I can make that a reality. But stuff on my list, if you have other things that you think would be pretty interesting to see or suggestions, let me know. But I think that's all I've got for now. So thanks for watching.